The English Channel, the world's busiest shipping lane. Every day, tens of thousands cross it by ferry. It's a safe, routine trip. Until one ship capsizes just over a kilometre outside port. Within 90 seconds, hundreds of people are fighting for their lives in the icy water. 193 died in Britain's worst maritime accident since the Titanic. Now, with advanced computer simulations, we reveal exactly what went wrong on the Herald of Free Enterprise. Disasters don't just happen, they're a chain of critical disaster. Europe, Belgium, Zeebrugge. The Herald of Free Enterprise, an 8,000-ton car and passenger ferry owned by the European shipping company Townsend Torrison, arrives from Dover. She's made the 4.5-hour journey across the English Channel safely thousands of times. 4:30 p.m. Assistant bosun Mark Stanley completes his duties and heads to a crew cabin for his break. He won't be needed on the car deck again until just before the ship sails at 6 p.m. By 5 p.m., cars and trucks are starting to roll onto the Herald's lower car deck through her giant bow doors. A cut-price ticket deal means the ship will be at capacity tonight, and the crew have just 1 hour to complete loading. Once the lower deck is full, the crew must load the upper car deck. But there's a problem. The loading ramp at Zeebrugge doesn't reach the upper car deck. To reduce the gap, the captain must lower the ship in the water. He does this by pumping seawater into her ballast tanks. After 30 minutes, the ship sits 1 meter lower in the water. Only now can loading of the upper deck begin. 5:57. The crew finally finishes loading, but they're too late. The Herald will not depart on schedule tonight. Lee Cornelius places the safety chain across the bow doors. First Officer Sable tells Captain Lurie that loading is complete.
Okay, loading complete. Copy that.
Just over a kilometre outside Zeebrugge harbour, something is desperately wrong on the Townsend Torrison ship, the Herald of Free Enterprise. The Herald starts to veer off course. Captain Lurie wrestles with the controls, but she's not responding. Then on E-deck, the lower car deck, a crew member alerts one of the assistant pursers. There's a big problem. Water. Vast amounts of it pour down the stairs from the upper car deck. The purser races up the stairs to C-deck, where there's a radio. He desperately tries to call the bridge, but there's no response. (6:28 p.m.) Now, a massive jolt. This time the ship tilts a full 30 degrees to the left. Before Captain Lurie can issue a mayday call, the tilting ship throws him to the floor. The fall knocks him unconscious. Now the seawater breaks through the ship's portholes. The ferry's entire left side sinks into the North Sea, leaving only its right flank visible above the water. In a stroke of luck, the ship comes to rest on a sandbank. The sandbank stops it from sinking further, at least for now. Inside the flooded Herald, more than 500 passengers and crew fight for survival.
Mayday relay. Ostend radio. Mayday message number 1.
6:43, 15 minutes since the capsize. the water levels finally stabilize. 35 minutes after the Herald capsizes, Coast Guard helicopters help pick up survivors. Rescue ships continue to arrive. Local divers turn up to offer help. It's extremely dangerous to dive inside an unstable ship, but they know they are the survivors' only chance. 9 p.m. It's 2.5 hours since the Herald capsized. Divers are still finding survivors, but dead bodies are starting to outnumber the living. 11:30. Diver Pete Lagaste has now been on the Herald of Free Enterprise for 4.5 hours. He's losing all hope of finding any more survivors. On shore, 35 ambulances rush the wounded to nearby hospitals. News of the disaster flashes around the globe.
Drama at sea. A massive rescue effort is underway tonight off the coast of Belgium as hundreds of passengers aboard a capsized ferry boat are missing in frigid waters of the English Channel.
The scale of the disaster shocks the world. Early reports put the death toll at 150, making it the worst peacetime British maritime accident since the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. As dawn breaks, stories emerge of miraculous survival and heroic actions by passengers and crew. One man acts as a human bridge so that others can escape. A truck driver rescues a 5-year-old girl whose whole family are lost. The disaster is unimaginable. How could a modern 8,000-ton vessel sailing in perfect conditions capsize in only 90 seconds just over a kilometre out of port? As the Herald is a British vessel, the UK government's Department of Transport hires the investigators. Ian Dann, one of Britain's leading naval architects, has been investigating marine accidents for 32 years. The scale of this tragedy shocks him.
I think this was one of the worst disasters that I've ever had anything to deal with, because there were people who had walked on board that ferry, and within 20 minutes of the ferry leaving port, they were fighting for their lives.
Dan must find out exactly what happened on the night of March 6th to ensure that such a catastrophe never happens again. Now, by rewinding the events of that fateful night and by going deep into the investigation, we can reveal what really caused the Herald of Free Enterprise to capsize. Advanced computer simulation will take us where no camera can go, into the heart of the disaster zone. The day after the tragedy, investigators take a boat out of the capsized Herald. It's a shocking sight. The ship appears to be intact. On the ship's visible side, they see no immediate sign of collision or damage. But what they see at the Herald's bow astounds them. The huge bow doors that allow vehicles on and off the ferry are wide open. It's clear to the investigators that water must have poured through these gaping doors. The media dubbed the open bow doors the doors of death. Ian Dann's team need to find out why the doors are open. How could this happen? To find out, they question surviving crew members who worked on the car deck that night. They learn that it's the job of First Officer Leslie Sable to supervise the loading of vehicles. It's also his responsibility to get the Herald loaded swiftly so that it can depart on time. If he fails, he could be reprimanded by his bosses.
and it was such a difficult market to make a lot of money in, and of course one got commercial success by turning the vessels around very quickly.
30 minutes to disaster. The team discover that tonight Sable is under pressure. The cheap ticket deal means the car deck will be full. As the last car rolls onto the ship, the call is announced for harbour stations.
Stations, all stations. Herald of Free Enterprise, about to leave the harbour, proceeding outwards.
This is the signal for crew to go to their positions for departure. Lee Cornelius's final duty on the car deck is to put a safety chain across the bow doors. First Officer Leslie Sable hurries to the bridge. They're now 5 minutes behind schedule. He is the last to leave the lower deck. Harbour stations is also the signal to close the bow doors using a hydraulic control lever on the car deck. Investigators discover the responsibility for this crucial job falls to Assistant Boatswain Mark Stanley.
Stations, all stations.
But when they question Mark Stanley about his actions that night, they're in for a shock. When he should be on the car deck closing the bow doors, Mark Stanley is still asleep in his cabin. He took a nap after the ship docked in Zeebrugge, but slept through the call for harbour stations.
The Enterprise, about to leave the harbour, proceeding.
But the investigators are puzzled. Why does no other crew member notice that the bow doors are wide open and raise the alarm? They learn that who closes the doors and when is a hit-and-miss affair. The bow doors are left open because the assistant boatswain is asleep, and on this night, no one else does the job for him. The investigators find that there is no fail-safe system for closing the bow doors. Although it's Mark Stanley's job to shut them, it should be double-checked by First Officer Leslie Sable. But in the race to stay on schedule, it was normal practice for the First Officer to leave the car deck before the doors were closed.
The officer who was to have done this checking had to also at that time be on the bridge, so he had to be in two places at once, which of course was impossible.
Dan and his team discover another major flaw in the system. The captain cannot easily see the bow doors from the bridge. So unless a crew member tells him otherwise, he automatically assumes they are closed. "23 minutes to disaster. Captain Lurie backs out of berth 12. He's totally unaware that no one has closed the 5-meter bow doors on the car deck. It's clear to investigators that a combination of human error and poor systems causes the Herald to sail with her bow doors open. But this shocking discovery still doesn't solve the mystery of the Herald's capsize.
One of the big puzzles was how so much water could get onto the vehicle deck when it was 10, 11 feet above the calm sea level.
It would take thousands of tons of water to capsize a ship the size of the Herald. But the bow doors to her car deck are sighted nearly 3.5 meters above the waterline. Investigators suspect that in calm seas, they should be well beyond the reach of any waves. Then they discover that 4 years before, the Herald's sister ship set sail from Dover with her bow doors open. And yet she survived without incident. It confirms their suspicions. Even with her doors open, the Herald should have made it safely across the channel. So why didn't she? Investigator Ian Dand starts to explore what could reduce the clearance between bow doors and waterline. He discovers that the short loading ramp at Zeebrugge causes a problem. It's not long enough to reach the Herald's upper car deck. So Captain Lurie must fill a ballast tank in the bow with seawater to lower the Herald to the right level. This makes the ship sit 1 meter lower in the water at the bow. The operation reduces the clearance between bow doors and waterline to 2.5 meters. Zeebrugge Harbour is relatively shallow, just 15.5 meters deep. Dand has a hunch that this plays a role. As a ship sails, her movement creates low pressure under the hull that sucks the bow downward. In deep water, the effect is small, but when Dand runs tests, he discovers the effect is much greater in shallow water. As the water is forced through the narrow gap between ship and seabed, it rushes out from under the hull faster. This surge of water creates an area of low pressure under the ship, dragging it down even further. As the Herald sails on March 6th, the clearance between her open bow doors and the waterline is just 1.5 meters. Sailing in this condition would be risky, but investigators are not convinced it would be enough to cause the capsize. So how did so much water get onto the Herald's car deck? There's only one way for them to find out. Berth 12, Zeebrugge Harbour, May 10th, 1987. 9 weeks after the loss of the Herald, Ian Dand begins a crucial experiment aboard her sister ship, the Pride of Free Enterprise. He is set to restage the Herald's final, fateful journey. The Pride is identical to the Herald. She's weighted with the same amount of ballast. The weather and tidal conditions are the same. The Pride maneuvers through Zeebrugge Harbour at a normal departure speed of 10 to 15 knots. Her bow doors stand 1.5 meters clear of the waterline, just like the Herald. As she sails, she creates a wave at the bow, but it breaks well below the bow doors. Next, Dan wants to see how high the bow wave gets as the ship accelerates. A bank of video cameras capture the wave from every angle. At 16.9 knots, the wave crests safely below the bow doors, rolling away from the ship. Then, Dand instructs the skipper to increase the speed. The ship is now sailing at 17.4 knots. The acceleration has an immediate effect. Not only does the bow wave increase, but it also changes direction. Instead of rolling forwards, the wave splashes back, up, towards the bow doors. Compelling, but not conclusive. The wave is only 2.5 meters, still not big enough to flood the car deck. Dan believes the Herald was sailing faster when she left port. He ups the speed half a knot to 18 knots, the maximum permitted speed. Suddenly, the wave balloons wildly. It is now almost 4 meters high, big enough to engulf the bow doors. Investigator Ian Dand has proved that 2,000 tons of water flooded onto the Herald's car deck. He knows that even this much water shouldn't be enough to sink a large ship. That's because traditionally, ships are divided into watertight compartments below the waterline. But the Herald's design is different. She has a huge open car deck with no dividing walls, so vehicles can easily drive on and off. It allows quick turnarounds at port in what is a highly competitive market. But the Herald's greatest commercial strength ends up being her downfall. Investigators calculate that with 2,000 tons of water rushing around her car deck, the Herald would become unstable very quickly. As the Herald sails, she naturally rocks from side to side. The water surges to the lowest point, making the ship tilt. At first, the ship's huge buoyancy allows her to recover.
Water is rather an unstable entity and would rush to one side or the other of the vehicle deck, acting like a sort of pendulum, if you like.
With each swing, the water surges more violently, causing the ship to tilt more steeply. Eventually, the ship reaches a point where she's unable to recover. Seven weeks after the tragedy, salvage tugs tow the Herald to port. The final death toll is 193, including 38 crew members. The investigators' final report finds that the Herald's loss is largely down to human error. The disaster led to a major rethink of safety measures on British car ferries. Closed-circuit TV cameras now allow captains to see the bow doors from the bridge. And indicators also tell them when the doors are closed. Shipping companies must modify their vessels to improve stability with features such as dividing bulkheads. It means that if a ship takes on water, it must be able to survive for at least 30 minutes without capsizing. The Herald of Free Enterprise disaster was a wake-up call to the maritime industry. The safety regulations it prompted have set a new high standard for the world to follow.
Seconds from Disaster returns at the same time tomorrow. After the break, we examine the legacy of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor.